John Lestock. I've been in payroll, gosh, I have to think back since at least the early 2000s, and it was primarily U.S. payroll, domestic payroll. The closest I had to getting a taste of international was a couple of jobs ago when I'm down in Texas. We company I worked for opened an office in Toronto. I almost said Montreal. It was Toronto, Canada. I remember it was the funniest thing. The payroll manager had come to me and she goes, "Well, I got a call from the home office." I said, "Yeah." They asked us, "What do you know about Canadian payroll?" And we said, "Nothing." And they said, "Good. We have an office in Canada starting next month." So she said, "You and I need to get some training now." So we did. We went to the American Payroll Association, their main home office, their main training center in San Antonio, which wasn't too far from us in Houston, had a week-long class on Canadian payroll. So we went out there and learned it. And yes, it's all North America. You think, well, how different can it be? But it's compared to U.S. payroll, it's very different, night and day. So at the time, to me, that was exciting because it was my first foray into something completely different, completely new. We still outsourced to ADP Canada, but we wanted to have enough of a base foundational understanding so that we could manage ADP Canada, so we understand what they're doing and we could be intelligent about the work that's being done. That was 2000, God, I'm not to age myself, 4-ish, 3, 4. So fast forward, I still in Texas, still working in U.S. payroll. But my career for the years, I've always been started in accounting and then veered off into employee benefits. To the U.S. can be a very complicated field as well, too, mostly pension plans. Steered over into payroll for a while, went back to benefits, moved here to Seattle, worked at Starbucks Coffee Company. My wife worked in benefits. I worked in payroll, working on our W-2s, which is like a year-end statement, kind of like I guess in Ireland it'd be a P60 be the closest. So I got to work on those. And she left Starbucks to go to Boeing. I left to go work at a company called, a couple companies. I went to Milliman. They did benefits consulting. So I'm back into benefits again. Different company doing benefits. And then I got pulled into a little bit of payroll, still domestic, still doing accounting. And then eventually found my way to Boeing this year, or actually 2018. God, I can't believe it's 2019 already.
Oh, yes.
Wow, what a blur. And I got a job in international payroll. And I explained, well, I don't really have much experience. Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. You can handle this. This is something new. It's fine. So I got kind of thrown into it. And I went from just knowing a lot about US and a little bit about Canada to, all right, we're going to give you a couple of countries. Let's give you Hong Kong. Let's give you Japan. Let's give you Ireland. Let's give you Belgium. Let's give you Thailand. Oh, it was very humbling. My perspective is a bit limited, again, because I'm so new to the global payroll function.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what I've seen has been with the American Payroll Association. I started in 2016 as a board member, as a vice president. So I would attend the annual Congress. And I noticed the first time I attended, I think the Global Payroll Management Institute, they were pretty brand new. Maybe they were a year old, if even. They were so brand new. And they had their GPMI forum within Congress during the expo. It was a very small section, if I remember correctly. It wasn't very big. It was exciting to see it. It was the first exhibit I went towards. I had to talk to the vendors. I want to meet people. It's like, wow, somebody from another country. I want to meet them. I want to meet somebody from India, from England, from anywhere. I don't care because it's something different, something exciting. It's new, it's exotic, right? And it was a small group. Maybe I couldn't even tell you the number of vendors, but it was a small, intimate group. But it was interesting. It was my first taste of global payroll. The following year, I noticed the exhibits were getting much bigger, more vendors, more involvement. I'm noticing even within Congress where they offer sessions or courses or, classes, more and more classes geared towards global payroll.
Yes.
There were quite a few when I first went to Congress in 2016, but in 2017 I saw a heavier emphasis, heavier involvement. And a lot of that could be GPMI as an entity growing and having more influence, but I just seemed to be more aware of it. It seemed to be a bigger, more significant component of all the overall payroll experience. The classes, the vendors, whatever was included with Congress, international was a bigger and bigger piece of the whole thing. Last year, it was even bigger. It just keeps growing and growing. So I guess if that were reflective of the industry, it just seems to be getting bigger. That it's, I don't say it's the hottest trend, it's the newest thing now, but there seems to be more awareness of it. You know, I suppose if I'd have started in global payroll 10 years ago, it would have been very different. Maybe a company managing individual contracts with local payroll providers in 20, 30 different countries. And now we're at the point where we have what they call a payroll aggregator, where you're going to contract with one company who in turn has relationships with those 20 or 30. I don't know if that's a newer concept. It feels like it's fairly new, because I would think if that were around for a while, more companies would have jumped on that right away. Because especially in the US, we love one-stop shopping. That's our thing. We did it in the employee benefits world. We don't want to have to, for example, deal with one insurance company for health, a whole separate finance company for retirement plans, a third one for disability or life. We'd rather have one-stop shopping. So you've got companies out there, if that's what they do. So that concept of one company managing other relationships on your behalf. So for you, it feels like it's one and the same, when in
Yes.
reality, it's one company and say 50 behind them. It's
Yes.
not unusual.
Yes.
That doesn't work overseas. You can't. So the first thing you have to learn is don't have, and this is going to sound terrible, don't have an American centric point of view. You got to take that off. The rest of the world functions differently. They do things differently. And the first thing you have to learn is respect how they do things. That, for example, in Asian countries, there is something called a 13th month payment. There's only 12 months. Right. But there's a 13th month payment. It's expected. It may not be regulated, it may not be required. It's expected. And a couple of European countries want that too. Well, that seems unusual. At least to me, it feels new.
Yes.
And if it's a bigger company where there's a department that in the US we call it total compensation, which would be the individuals, their job is to analyze how you pay people. They're compensation analysts. And most people think of that in terms of, oh, you figure out a salary scale for base pay and you figure out bonuses. True, and there's also, they'll look at other forms of compensation, retirement plans, benefits, because they all fall into the total compensation picture. Those folks, when you realize, yeah, in the US it's important because you want your payroll folks to work hand in hand with them. They're the ones setting the pay policy. In the payroll department, they're just administering it. You know, if the policy is we are going to pay within this range, well, that's setting the salaries for everyone that you're going to pay. That's so important that you have a relationship with that department in those other countries. They should know what is culturally acceptable. What does the market demand? If you intend to hire talent in a particular country, it's expected that you're going to offer these types of benefits. 13th month, or in Belgium, what is it? They have the double holiday pay in June or something. And I believe that is regulated, that is required. Even if it weren't, it's customary, it's standard. If you expect to hire anyone that's, halfway decent, someone of substance, you want good candidates, you need to be aware that that's what you have to pay. And that's not necessarily, well, the payroll person should know that. Well, no, whoever's setting your pay policy should know that. It's not regulated. It's whatever the company wants to do. But if you want to tap into that labor market, it's expected you're going to have that. So it's not just having a relationship to those other countries, but even internally, making sure that the individuals responsible for setting policies regarding how people are paid, they're communicating well with payroll, and there's a back and forth. Otherwise, we're kind of flying blind, like, well, I didn't know we had to pay that. And all of a sudden, we're have to rerun a payroll and we have to make a correction,
Yes.
and somebody didn't, communicate very well.
Yeah, you need in-country levels kind of subject matter knowledge, and usually where it comes from your payroll provider. And it's very important who is your link with that in-country payroll provider that can translate that information back to the company, that it's not only retained in that country, but it's back transferred to your headquarters in the US, and that you're aware of those costs, I suppose, for the finance function, what is coming your way, and you can probably budget your cash for the year, and what's the exposure going to be. So these are
Exactly.
very important components, I suppose, of the global payroll process that you need to think about.
I think in general, if there's any process that could be standardized, just we'll start there. You can standardize a process that I thought I read a statistic someplace, and I could be completely wrong. When you look at payroll in different countries, I thought it was 70% of the transactions are similar. It's the same. So you could standardize it across different countries, regardless of what it is. A new joiner, you know, US, I'd say a new hire, but apparently in global parlance, it's a new joiner or a leaver. You didn't terminate, they left. That it's it's a generally speaking, a standard transaction across countries. This is
Yes.
what you do when someone joins. This is what you do when someone leaves. This is how you process the standard salary. This is how you process an allowance. That's generally the same type of transaction, regardless of which country. You standardize the process. Well, if you can standardize it, you can automate it. That's why I started with standardizing. It's like, well, at that point, where do I not need people? Could I just do it instead of an individual collecting information and then turning around and sending that to the payroll provider, the global payroll provider, the aggregator, and saying, hey, for this country, I need you to pay everyone's salary. I need you to pay these extra allowances, or here are some exceptions for deductions, and there's some other changes to keep track of. Okay, that's me collecting it and manually sending it to someone. To automate that is, how about we just give you a data feed? From our payroll system, here's everything that's changed. You know what the change date is. Take that into your system directly and just process it. And then just review the output. And the output should be standardized, where I could easily spot what should have changed, was it changed correctly, and if not, we'll revert back and they can do the rework. Any time along that process that could be automated, they're going to do it. They're going to add artificial intelligence. They're going to add they call it bot, I guess, some sort of piece of software or application or something where a computer is going to do some calculating or crunching, and then you don't completely eliminate people, but it may reduce their involvement, the human involvement, where maybe they only see the output. Maybe even the output, for the most part, it's run through a process that's some sort of a automated audit to check for certain things. And maybe as a person, as a human, you're only going to see exceptions, the really big anomalies, the strange things that deviated from the standard process. Where in theory, if everything is supposed to work the way it does, you'd have very few of those. Or if the transactions are so standardized, you only see 5% of the transactions that popped out because they were not standard. There's something unusual. So then you're better leveraging your humans, your people. I like to say humans like we're all, business units. But the fact is, you use automation for a standard process to get your output. The people are going to focus their attention on only what needs to have the most attention. I'm not going to waste my time double checking overtime calculations when an app could do that. Some piece of software could do that. We're confident by just a random test of a few people out of, say, 100, they look pretty good. They look accurate. There shouldn't be a problem. If there is, I would expect to see that on some sort of an exception report or something that flagged this and said, this isn't unusual. This doesn't follow standard. We need to research this some more. Maybe it's calculated wrong. Maybe there's an exception that goes outside of the system. So I guess the short answer is, if you can take the work and standardize it to a process as much as possible, and then after you standardize it, you can automate it. And I see a lot of that happening. Eventually, you get to the point where not that you need fewer people, but you can take the same number of people and they can do more value-added work. They can focus their attention on what needs to be focused on and not spin their wheels on items that, you're wasting your time. They're perfectly fine. There's a better way to do that. It's like working smarter, not harder, I guess. Not to sound cliche, but that's where I see the technology going. The more they can standardize and automate, the better. And it's not so that we could do it with fewer people. It's you could take the same number of people and they could do more. So if we were to add another 10 or 15 countries, we don't have to staff up because we just added 10 or 15 countries, or we have to staff up at a very minimal amount because we've got automation. We've standardized this to the point where it's just, we've got a process, we've got a rhythm, we can do this. because as countries
Yes.
grow globally, they're not thinking about, well, oh, we can have a constraint. Can they handle the work? They're not thinking about that. They're jumping on opportunities, and they're going to open up in countries that you would have never considered. Kazakhstan. Who would have thought of that? But guess what? We've got it. Answering questions. But the idea of the technology is you don't tie people up doing processes that could be automated, and you're better utilizing their talents where it's definitely needed, where you'd rather have them focus their energy on, which could be the interaction with employees, answering those questions, or managing processes on the outside so that it can feed into the automated process that we have in place. Things don't just happen by magic. It does
Yes.
have to manage it. We do have to manage it. I think it made it a lot more complicated, especially having data flow across borders. So when someone had the brilliant idea of, we could do everything from this one spot. For example, we could do all payroll globally from Seattle, and we're just going to have it all done here. That's great on paper, but in practice, if there are laws in place that limit how, especially personal data, leaving countries' borders, and it has to stay right there, it completely changes the dynamics of our process. So what could have been centralized, now you have to decentralize it a little bit, because you don't bring the data to you to do the work. You have to go to the data and do it there. You may be doing it remotely, but you still have to store the data there, log into a server there and do the work. And it may have a lot of protections in that server. So we're used to doing it on a laptop where things are efficient, things are quick because you got great software. Now you log it into a server and it's going to be slower because there's a lot of security controls in place. It's a secure environment, and it feels clunky. Things kind of move slower. It does not, as if the technology doesn't move as fast because there's a lot of security walls and such to get through to even touch that data. So my running joke was always, I feel like I'm doing payroll underwater because
Right.
everything moves so slow.
Slow.
But that's the environment you have to work with, because again, whether it's GDPR or another country's data privacy laws, there are those complications where there are limitations with how you can use the data, when you can use it, who can use it, and sometimes that make your process more complicated because it adds more inefficiency to what would have otherwise been a more efficient process. That's just too bad. There are reasons why those laws are in place. It is to protect the employees in that particular
Yes.
country. And it's a matter of, well, they don't have those laws here. I look at that and say, talk to me in 10 years and see if we have those laws. Here in the US, the common mentality is California passes a law that seems outrageous. That seems really, what happens is you get a state that's the trendsetter. And if they pass a law and then a couple of other states follow their lead, like, oh, we could do that. So then Washington does it, Oregon does it. And then it goes from west to east, or maybe Virginia passes a law or Massachusetts passes a law. And then what happens is it becomes this hodgepodge. And eventually, if there's enough support, maybe there's a federal law. So it could happen. So if something like a GDPR passes in Europe and they go, we don't have that in the US, they can give it time. Eventually, someone's going to get the idea. It's like looking at somebody else's paper or somebody else's test. You think, I like your answers. I'm going to copy that. And that's exactly what happens. Somebody introduces a law and whammo, we have a protection law too. We may have it at state level, and if there's enough states that do it, federal may come in and say, just to streamline this, because this is becoming ridiculous, we'll just have that as a federal level. Everybody
Okay.
agree, and then they'll just do it.